All right, welcome to Changing the Stigma. My name is James Cline. I am your host. This show is designed to change the outlook, the way people look at mental health, not just for veterans. As you can see, I'm wearing my Marine Corps polo shirt. I did serve in the Marine Corps. I served in the Army. I was also a police officer in the state. I do work almost every day with veterans and other folks, but we really need to change the stigma for everyone out there when it comes to mental health. I've talked about it on other episodes with other guests that are in the field, that work with veterans, that work with non-veterans, that people are just in the civilian world. This is really something that we need to change. In the last episode, I talked about different ways that we could, as the general public, can change that stigma, how we can change the talk, get people to come forward and talk about mental health, the different aspects of it, how it affects their lives. Almost every single day, you're going to hear somebody come forward to you and tell them all their issues they have medically, whether they have a sore back, sore ankle, they have a fever, they have a cough, maybe they even have cancer. They're more than willing to come forward and talk to you about that. But when it comes to mental health, most people don't want to talk to you. They don't want you even get wind that they might suffer from some type of mental health. So a mental health issue could be anxiety, it could be depression. A lot of folks know PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Unfortunately, a lot of times with veterans, they get automatically snowballed or grouped together as having PTSD because they served in the military. And of course, recently we had a lot of activity go on with the military over the last couple decades between Iraq, Afghanistan. You can even go back as far as Korea, Vietnam. We still have some World War II vets that are alive, and I give them all the respect because they've lived a long time, they've seen a lot, and a lot of those folks, they weren't ever educated about mental health. Can you imagine the Vietnam vets that just in the last 10 years, we've had more research into mental health issues than we have in any other time, and they could have come forward and asked for that help instead of getting off the plane and having things thrown at them, demeaned, called baby killers, things like that. So we need to allow people, with all the education, with all the research that we have today, we need to make sure everyone comes forward. So some of the stuff I talked about in the last episode had to do with talking about openly. We need to have that open conversation when it comes to mental health. It should be everyday nature that you be able to have that conversation. And I've talked about it and posed this question to people on past episodes, and even on the radio show, Changing the Stigma, on WSMN 1590 AM, is if you were going to call out of work, would you call out of work because you're sick or have a fever, or are you going to call out because you're too depressed or too anxious about coming in? Almost everyone's going to call out sick, they have a fever, whatever it might be. I haven't met anyone yet that's going to call out because they're suffering from some kind of depression and can't get out of bed. Maybe they're too anxious about something that's going to happen at work. Maybe they didn't get something done, or maybe they have a presentation and they feel nervous about it, so they get too anxious, have a panic attack. A lot of that stuff happens. So we need to be able to come forward, have that open conversation. Educating yourselves about what there are out there for resources for individuals that might be struggling and are afraid to come forward. I've talked about the different resources that we do have out there for mental health services. You've got the community health centers across the state. You've got the New Hampshire Rapid Response Access Point. Now what you have also is 988. I've talked about it. There's not a lot of advertising for it. Basically, 988 is the 911 for mental health. So 911 is for medical emergencies, maybe there's some criminal activities, fire emergency, and 988 was created for those mental health emergencies. Can you imagine if you're anxious because something just happened to you and a whole bunch of lights and sirens show up at your residence or your work, or maybe you're on the side of the road? That's going to bring your anxiety up even more. So now that we have 988, we have trained individuals that have experience in the field, have had education in the field, or might even have shared experiences that can help you get through it and let you know that you can be resilient and that there's hope to kind of get through it. So it's much better to have a licensed clinician show up or a peer support specialist show up when it comes to mental health than it is to have a bunch of firemen, EMTs, paramedics, police show up and make things probably a little bit worse from your perspective, even though they're all there just trying to help. Some of the folks are been trained in this when they're emergency services, but now that we have 988, we can continue to educate the emergency services with it and be able to have a nice warm handoff if they realize that when they show up, it's a mental health emergency, and they can pass this off to those folks that are specially trained to deal with that. Be conscious of your language. Make sure it's person-centered. Don't sit there and say, point at somebody and call them the schizophrenic. Don't sit there and call somebody that they have a panic disorder. Call them by their name. Call them by whoever they are. You wouldn't come up to say, oh, there's cancerous John, would you? So you wouldn't do that with mental health issue, because mental health, when people have struggles, it is a medical condition. It is affecting your brain and other systems in your body, and it's causing you not to do things. Just like you would if you broke your arm, if you had a fever, you're unable to do things. So we need to treat it just like it is. You need to let them know they're a survivor, that there's hope to get through whatever they might go through. Encourage equality between physical illness and mental health illness, which is also called parity. So we need to make sure that they're treated exactly the same. And a lot of facilities, a lot of emergency rooms, a lot of doctors, medical providers, they're all getting the training to help them assist and learn what the differences are and what the signs and symptoms are of a mental health issue. Another thing we can do to help change this is make sure we're empathetic with individuals that are suffering from a mental health illness versus being sympathetic. So if you're empathetic with somebody, that means you're able to put yourself in their shoes. That means you can kind of see it from their point of view, what they might be struggling with, how hard it might be for them. And it's not using statements where you're like, oh, I know what you're saying, I understand. What you really want to tell them is, I can see it from your perspective, and kind of repeats back some of the things they might have told you when it comes to their mental health struggles. You certainly don't want to be sympathetic. Sympathetic is when you feel sorry for them. This is where you start giving them advice. What you really want to do is educate yourself on the resources that are available in your community, maybe even larger, what's available in your state. And if you don't feel there's resources available in your state, look what's outside your community, outside your state, or talk to your state reps, your state senators, the governor's office. Make sure what you think should be in place is in place. You'd be surprised about some of the resources that you have that are available to you that you may not be aware of. I recently went up to Moultonborough, New Hampshire. I did a training up there, what's called Mental Health First Aid. This was for the teachers and educators up in the school district. And this was for what's called a youth mental health first aid. So mental health first aid is a resource, a training that you can use to help see the signs and symptoms of what somebody might be struggling through. There's different versions to it. There's an adult course, there's a youth course, and there's also a teen course. And I'll kind of explain what the differences are. The adult course is for any adult 18 and older that can take this training. There's different setups when it comes to the training. Most of the time, you want to be able to dedicate an entire day to the training. There's a full 8-hour course that you can take, and there's also a blended course that you can take, which is a couple hours virtual online, a self-paced course. And there's also another one where you do about 4.5 hours combined with that in person with an instructor. You do a bunch of activities. The instructor helps facilitate the program. And you get to learn a lot from each other, what your roles are, what can be done in the community, what the resources are, and again, what those signs and symptoms are when it comes to mental health issues. It could also be signs and symptoms of suicide, substance use. So it's a great training. There's also one that's designed for youth, which again, I just did last week up in Moultonborough. That's a great training where those individuals that work with youth, which are between the adolescence age, between 12 and 20. That teaches them to see the signs and symptoms of those individuals that they are working with. That way they can find the appropriate help for them. And then the teen is actually a new program that's designed, which is actually promoted by quite a few celebrities. The biggest name that I'm aware of that promotes this new program is Lady Gaga. So before her shows, she puts on a free training for teens to come in and take this training. So it's designed for those that are in grades age 10 through 12. So if you live in a school district and the educators, at least 5% of them have taken the youth mental health first aid course, they can then go in and teach the 10 and 12th graders also the mental health first aid. So that way they can be well supported and the programs kind of cross over and similar so they can support those youths, especially if they're talking to a peer that might be struggling with a mental health issue. The age of onset for mental health is getting lowered almost every single day. It used to be a lot older when it came to diagnosing somebody, that it was later in the teens or even early adulthood before people would officially be diagnosed. There are ages like 10, 11, 12 where individuals are starting to get diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Can you imagine what the youth are going through now with the access to social media, with all the pressure they have on them? A lot of the education is self-paced, so they have to complete things on their own, and they have to be self-driven. Can you imagine if you posted a picture of yourself and you thought it was a good picture and you started getting different messages back, like, oh, that's a great picture, and then you started getting some negative ones, like, how would you post that? You've got big ears. I can't believe someone like you would post something like this. Who would like you? Can you imagine what that would happen? That's just online. So we can imagine what that would happen if this happened in real life, in real time, face to face with somebody. You can see why the suicide rate for youth is on the rise. I believe the current stat is young girls between the age of 12 and 16 over the last year or so, or a little bit more, has increased almost 900% for suicide rates among them. The suicide rate right now in the world is right around 13 to 14 per 100,000. That's quite a bit. So that means almost 14 people per 100,000 of our population have decided that it's better to take their own lives than to stay around and be part of the community. And some of these folks, especially if they're younger, they can provide a lot of great resources. They can be very valuable to the community down the road once they get educated and fill a role that's needed within the community. Could you imagine the loss of somebody that's older when they take their life? All those experiences, all those things they've been through, they could be educating the youth that are coming up and the younger adults coming up, show them what mistakes have been made, teach them things that have happened in the past. Maybe these people could improve upon those. Can you just imagine what's lost because they've decided it's better to take their own lives than to stay around? So it averages about 132 suicides per day here in America. And a startling fact is 22 of those, or 17% of that number on average per day, are veterans. Can you imagine one population of individuals that have done a particular type of job, that they have the higher prevalence of taking their own lives than any other profession? That just tells you a lot of the things that these veterans are dealing with, and that we need to get those services in place and help them recognize that stuff before it gets to the point where they've decided to take their own lives. Even the unit I've deployed with to Afghanistan back in 2010, 2009, great unit, but I've lost soldiers that have gone through there because they've decided to take their own lives. From the combination of the stress from being in combat to coming home and not having things in place that were there before. Can you imagine if you went on vacation for a week and then you came back and a lot of the things that you had in place before them were gone? Let's just give an example of your credit score. We have here in America a system that's set up that's consumer-based. Basically, everything you do, including your job, can hinge on what your credit score is. It's always part of the interview. It's always part of you being hired. You can't even go get a car or a house or a lot of things out there unless you have a good credit score. So can you imagine if you left for a week and you had an 800 credit score and then you came back and found out that your credit score was 500? You would probably be upset, probably start getting angry. There's other responses that you could have. Then you start working on it and finding out that you have to correct this, you have to correct that. There's other things you have to try to get done because it's just a total mess. Can you imagine what you would feel like if you started getting depressed because you were getting frustrated, things weren't getting done, and then you just threw your hands up in the air and said, I'm not doing this. So just imagine what a veteran has to go through if they went on a deployment for 15 months, came back, and because businesses here in the US don't understand how long an individual is gone, because I know a lot of soldiers that try to put their stuff in deferment, put payments on hold, accounts on hold until they get back. A lot of these businesses only did it for 3 to 6 months, and they expect you to resubmit paperwork. Well, if you're in the middle of a combat outpost and on the border of Pakistan and Afghanistan with very limited services, especially when it comes to internet, the first thing on your mind isn't trying to send a deferment referral letter to whatever bank, whatever credit card, whatever mortgage company. You're expecting that folks back here are understanding and put that on hold when you submit it. So imagine coming back and finding out that you now have gone through a lot of the traumas that you go through, seeing other lives taken. Maybe you took other people's lives in self-defense. Maybe the enemy did things to other people, such as IEDs and blowing them up. There's all kinds of things that could have happened when you were overseas. Maybe you went 2 or 3 months without having contacted your family and you were stressed about what was happening. Maybe your family heard stories on the news about your unit being attacked and you weren't able to get in contact with them for a long time. And then you finally are on your way back and it gets delayed. So then you start getting depressed, you start getting anxious. Maybe you do have PTSD from events that happened. Maybe you were in a lot of firefights, being shot at, had mortars go off near you. Maybe you saw the aftermath of what happens when a 500 or 2,000 bomb gets dropped on a village, whatever it might be. And then you come back and you find out that your credit score is in the trash. Now you feel you kind of hopeless. And now you have thoughts coming in about taking your life, hurting yourself, whatever it might be. And then your whole time when you were in the military, you were told anytime you got injured, you got hurt, to kind of move on, get over it, and just keep on going forward. And now you're struggling to do it. Now you're not going out of your house. You're not following up on phone calls. You're unable to contact the credit bureau because you get put on hold for 30 minutes and you get frustrated and you hang it up. So you're not going forward and filling those steps. Can you imagine how all this stuff would snowball, not just for an individual, but a veteran? You've served your country, you come back, and something as simple as your credit has been destroyed on you, and you're trying to find a way out, and you're struggling with mental health. So what we need to do is put things in place to make sure that when veterans come back, or anybody is in a situation, they feel comfortable with coming forward, talking about what they were going through, and have that assistance in place. So that's being able to make sure that there isn't that stigma attached to mental health, and that we all come forward to support and be empathetic to all those individuals that we're out there to talk to, and not be sympathetic to them. Again, can you imagine just going on vacation for a week or two and having something as simple as that happen? Now compound on top of it when the veteran comes back, maybe a child has been born or some other bills haven't been paid. People have gotten married or divorced, or maybe someone passed away while you were gone and then you come back. So just imagine the stuff that these veterans go through and all this extra support that's needed out there. And if they can't come forward for that support because they feel like they're going to be looked at as weak or dangerous, this isn't the world that we should have. There should not be a stigma attached to it. And if we all have that open conversation, we can change that. Choose empowerment over shame. We want to make sure we empower people to come forward and talk about what they're struggling with. We shouldn't be shaming them. This isn't the 1940s in Nazi Germany where just because of your religion, you're being persecuted because of it. what makes this world an amazing place to live in right now, and even in the future and even in the past, is that we're all unique. We all have our own stories. We might all have our own struggles, but they're all individualized, and we need to understand that. Just because you may not suffer from some form of mental health issue doesn't mean somebody can't come forward and ask for help for it, and make sure that we support them through that. You don't have to fully understand it, but what I'm asking is to help change the stigma behind it, is that you educate yourself and you're there to support that individual when they do ask for the help. Another thing is to be honest about treatment. Talk about the different kinds of treatments that are out there. Maybe you might know some resources that the person you're trying to support doesn't know about, or maybe you can do some research online. You can call some community health centers here in New Hampshire. If you're working with a veteran, you can call the VA. There's multiple resources that we can come up with. A great one here in the state is 211. You can just call 211 and they'll talk to you about all the different resources that are available in the state. By doing that, we're not shaming those individuals. We're empowering them to get through whatever they need to get through and be there to help support them through it. Another way to change the stigma is to let the media know when they are stigmatizing mental health. That happens all the time. I've talked about it on the radio show. I also talked about it at least once on these episodes, is movies. Think of a movie poster when you have a creature. It's always some kind of creature that has some kind of evil intent or schizophrenia or whatever the mental health issue. When have you ever seen an individual in a monster movie that it never alluded to that they had a mental health issue? The Joker, what happened with the new Joker movie? It's a very dark movie. What ends up happening is the main character has lost his social services. He can't get his medications anymore. So what does he do? He turns to a life of crime and he spins out of control with his mental health. That's not what happens when somebody loses their services. What we can do is make sure people don't lose their services, and if they do because of some other type of circumstances, that we have other resources that are available for them. And that's learning what all those resources are here. I just watched a movie recently on one of the streaming services, and it involved a father and a daughter that were living in a forest out in Oregon. Didn't like society, didn't like authority, and almost immediately I picked up on that they were probably going to portray this person as being a veteran suffering from PTSD. Not too long into it, after watching it, I was recognized that that's exactly what took place, and by the end of it, that's exactly what happened. He gets services in place, doesn't like it, he ends up going on his own. We can't assume that every single veteran that has gone into service is coming back with some form of PTSD. We just can't make those assumptions. It's happened to me, it's happened to other veterans, and I still can't fathom that individuals that have served their country, served their community, served their state, have to come back when they're done with their service and they get treated that way. I thought we learned from our mistakes when it happened to the Vietnam veterans, but it's still continuing. It may not be verbally out front, but it's definitely still happening behind closed doors. And this doesn't help when the media promotes that. I challenge you with this. Go back and look at any movie, any type of news article, when someone has hurt someone else, and tell me that they don't allude to or allege this individual suffers from some kind of mental health issue. Every time there's a shooting, they always use that word allegedly, and we need to change that. We need to start looking at all the facts on what took place with this individual and make sure that they may or may not suffer from mental health. Sometimes people just do things to do things. And it's even worse now with these challenges that are on YouTube or whatever streaming service and whatever else, Twitter, any of those. There's all these challenges that happen and people end up getting hurt. And they don't suffer from mental health. They're just trying to be part of the community, trying to be cool, trying to fit in with the other folks. So another thing is not to harbor the self-stigma. This is really for the individual themselves, is to realize that there is hope, that there is resilience, that you can get through it, and that you should not be ashamed yourself because you're struggling with it. You should not be seen as not weak, you're not damaged, that this is a common thing. Again, 1 in 5 people around the world at some point in their life struggle with some type of mental health issue, and almost everyone is successful with moving on and getting help. And really what you need to do is you really need to come forward and ask for that help. The sooner you get intervention and assistance with your mental health struggle, the more likely you're going to be very successful of overcoming it. The longer you wait, just like anything, if you break your arm and you wait 3 days to go to the doctor or the emergency room, more than likely you're going to get more damage. Things could happen. You can get an infection. Maybe you might lose part of your arm because you waited too long. So if you can go forward and get help immediately when there's a medical issue, you got to understand a mental health issue is absolutely a medical condition. So the sooner you can get it treated, the sooner you can get addressed, the much easier it's going to happen for you to be successful, to overcome it, and get back on with whatever you were doing prior to that event. And the other thing is know that there's hope. There's plenty of success stories out there. There's things around the state called peer support centers. You can drop in and talk to individuals that have had shared experiences. You got peer support specialists that work at the crisis team. There's many resources out there that you can come forward. You can talk about those folks that have shared experiences, and you can find any of those if you go to newhampshire.gov and type in about peer support specialist. I thank you for listening to Change the Stigma. I want to talk more about this later on, but again, thank you for watching the show. Have a good week.